Yum, yum!
Let's take a look at creating an eyeball and texturing it with procedurals and gradients inside of Modo. I'm going to start by creating a sphere, and instead of coming over here and clicking on the sphere icon and changing any of the values, I'm just going to hold down Control, and you can see that the icon changes if I let off a control. The icon changes when you hold down Control, and it's just going to make a default unit sphere if I click. And there we go. It's added the sphere to the mesh container over here in the items list. And what I'm going to do is I want the poles of this sphere. The poles are the triangles, how it all comes to one point. Those are the poles in the sphere, and I want those basically running through the Z. So I'm going to hit E for rotate, and I'm just going to hold down Control to constrain it, and there we go. Now I've got it running through the center. Now, depending on what kind of eye I want to make, I might just stop right here. I could just have a perfect sphere, but what I'm going to do is I'm not going to take this all the way through to a photorealistic eye where we're going to have a bulge and a cornea and things like that. But I do want to have this this look really nice and have a finished look to it when we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and indent the iris area of the eye. So in polygon mode, I'm just going to lasso select these polys right here, turn this around so we can take a look at it. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to kind of start by flattening this out. Now there's a bunch of different ways that I can do that. I can come over to vertex and set the position to match the position of this point, but really all I'm going to do is go back over to basic and go to stretch, or I can hit R on the keyboard and it puts my cursor here. Now I can move move the handles here, or I can just go to my action center and do selection border, and it will move it right to that border, and then I'm just going to stretch it in down the Z. Okay, and I can hit spacebar to drop that. I always like to remember to change my action center so that I don't have to worry about what it's doing. You know, later if I forget that I had changed it. So I go ahead and change it back to default. So now what I'd like to do now is just kind of sink this in a little bit. I could keep it flat, depending on the eye. I've tried all different variations, but the iris really needs to be concave. So I'm going to hit B for bevel, click, and I'm just going to drag it in a little bit. Okay, just adding an extra row of polys around there. And I'm going to shift down arrow so that I can contract that selection a little bit. W for move, and I'm just going to move it in just a little, just getting a little indent there. Okay, and what I can also do is I'm going to just add a little more geometry here. So I'm going to go over to Mesh Edit, Loop Slice, click, and if I want, I can just adjust this a little bit, just bringing that in a hair. And then I'm going to spacebar, decrease my selection a little bit, move, and just pull it back just a little bit more. Okay, and that's going to work for me, something like that. Just nice little curved indent there. Now, a lot of times what I do is I go ahead and indent the pupil. I'll actually bevel it in, knowing that the pupil's more of a hole instead of just having it black. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that with textures, just so that we can kind of explore inside the shader tree and see some of the options. But just know that you can go ahead and model that in. The other thing that I could do is start breaking up my mesh into different materials. For this, I'm just going to make one material, and I'm going to keep it basic. So I'm going to hit M for set material, and for the name, let's just call this eyeball. Okay, and we'll just leave these values are fine. Actually, I'll go 100% on diffuse, and we'll leave the rest smoothing on. Okay, so I've given all the polygons that make up this mesh, I've given them a material name, so that we can keep it separate if we add other things to our scene. So what I could do is I could go in and select all the geometry right there and say I'm going to give that a material name of iris, and then I could contract the selection and give that a material name of Pupil. And then I can put different textures on those different materials. The problem with that is that I'll get a hard line. And you could argue that for an iris, you might want a hard line there, and for a pupil, you might want a hard line there. I tend to like that to be a little softer, and by having that hard line, you're pretty much setting yourself up for more work to have that be soft. So let's start with this and see where we can take it without adding any more materials to this. Okay, so let's head over to the shader tree, and we might as well head over to the render tab so we can start seeing how this is going to look. I'm just going to kind of position this, get a good idea of what we're looking at. And actually, I don't need to see these views right now. I'm just going to go full screen, okay, so that we can actually see what's happening here. It'll take a little longer to refresh, but it's not so bad. It moves pretty fast. Okay, so we've got our blank canvas. Now by default in the shader tree, if I drop down right here where it says render, if I drop that down, we've got some items already ready to go. We've got base shader, material, base material, and some people like to keep those in there and work. They've been known to throw me off a little bit, so I'm just going to delete them, okay? Because any material or shader, I want to go ahead and I want to add it, and I want to know that I've done it. So because I created a material for the surface of these polygons with eyeball, we've got this group here, this material group with material already built in. I'm going to go ahead and add a shader. So I know that's kind of what I already had, but again, by default, that base shader and base materials there, I just get rid of it, and I just keep adding materials and groups, and I'll add a shader or a material if needed. Okay, so we're ready to go. I can change some of the values on these, like maybe add some reflection, like maybe I want 5% reflection, maybe for Fresnel. I'll do 80%. These values, we could tweak those all day. What I really want to focus on is getting that iris texture on there, getting a pupil, and then kind of taking it a little farther than just a basic eye. Okay, so we'll go ahead and leave all these values for this material the same. We'll be changing stuff later. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to start by adding a detail that we didn't model in, and that's the pupil. Again, the pupil is more of a hole. It's not really just flat on the surface. So I need to find a way to kind of bevel that in. And again, I could have done it in the mesh, but I'm going to do it with displacement. So I'm going to come over here to Add Layer, and I'm going to go to the Procedural Textures, and I just need a basic shape. So I'm going to go to Geometric Circular. Okay, that's kind of given me an idea that this could work because I can see a round shape, but I'm seeing all this repetition, and I'm not really that excited about that because that might work for something else, but not this. But fortunately, there's this nice little handy repeat option here, and I'm going to turn that off. And so now I'm looking at this and I'm going, it's a pupil, but it's kind of the reverse of what I'd want if it were for color, but I'm going to use this for displacement. And if you have black here, that's going to go one direction, and if you have white, it's going to go the other, because you have black is low value and white is a high value. So what I'm going to do is come over here and say that for the black, I want 0. Okay, I don't want that black to affect it in any way. Now I could make it 50% gray, which should not have any effect on it, but just to play it safe, I'm just shutting it off. Okay, and for the foreground, the white, I do want it to affect the mesh. Okay, now before I start changing too many values, just so we can see it happening pretty much in real time, I'm going to come over here where it says diffuse color under the effect, right click, and I'm going to come over here and choose displacement. And we can already see, now it's kind of rough. When we render it, it'll look much nicer. But in this preview, it's looking a little blocky. We're getting some rough edges here, but it ends up rendering incredibly nice. So we have nothing to worry about there. Okay, I'm going to pretty much keep all the values the same, except I do think the pupil's probably a little large right now, and I also want to kind of smooth out the transition. So I'm going to go ahead and change the smooth to 100. Much nicer transition. It's not as harsh, not as crisp. And there's also another problem. Well, we talked about the pupil being more like a hole or being indented, and this is raised out, of course, because it's white. So I'm going to come over here and just say negative 100. Okay, and now it's pushed in. But that size is still bothering me. I want a little more iris, and of course that size is, I'm saying I want it smaller by default. But fortunately, we can animate these channels. So if we want to, during an animation, we could say, you know what, when a lot of light is hitting the character, let's bring the size of the pupil down. When not a lot of light is hitting the character, we need to open up that pupil to let more light in to make it easier to see. We can also use the size of a pupil to show excitement and fear and those kind of things. But for this, I'm just going to go for the base, and I'm looking at 100 millimeters. I'm going to try 80. And I'm liking that better. We could tweak these numbers, maybe try 50. If you make it too small, the character ends up looking kind of creepy, I think. So I'm going to just go ahead and leave it at 80, and we can always go back and change that. Okay, so now I think I'm finished from a modeling standpoint. Even though I'm using a procedural texture in the shader tree, I'm not using it to texture in this case. I'm actually using it as a modeling tool, and I love that I have that option. Okay, but now we need to start texturing this thing. So I think the best place to start would be to start with the iris. That's where all the fun colors are and the shapes, and the rest will come out pretty simple. So let's go ahead and add some color for the iris. So I'm going to start by adding, let's do another procedural texture. You know what, let's do that circular again. Now I could have just duplicated that, but I'm just going to start from scratch here and turn that repeat off. And I'm going to end up changing this, but first I need to change the size. I want to get that iris out close to the edge here. So let's take a look. Come over here to size, and I'm going to try 0.4. Nope, that's way too big. I'm going to try 0.3, and I think that's getting close. I'm gonna tighten up some of the values, I think, as well, but let's just try lowering this 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. Okay, that's right on the edge. It's got a nice soft edge, but I think I'm gonna adjust it a little bit more. But let's see the values. I can always come back here and change the scale. So I'm gonna look, and for smooth, remember how we smoothed it out for the people? I'm not gonna adjust that. I'm gonna keep that. I'm gonna change. Well, first I'm going to take this black, set the alpha to 0. I don't need to see it. And for the color, let's pick some kind of blue color, but I want to go really dark with the blue. So I'm just going to slide that over. I don't want to go black, but I want to go incredibly dark. Okay. I'll try something like that. Okay. And I want to tighten this up, so I'm just going to take the lower clip, and now I'm getting a harder edge. But I'm noticing that I'm inside that lip, so I'm going to go back, and I'm going to take the size and I'm going to size it up. Let's try 300. I think I'm close. Let's try 0.35. Too much, and I'm liking that. Now, a lot of people ask me whenever I'm keying in these values, they're like, how do you know what value to key in? Hopefully you just saw that I actually don't know what value to key in. It's kind of guesswork for me. I type in a value. If it's too big, I go with the lower value, and I just keep going back and forth until I find what I'm looking for. And again, I could make that a much crisper edge. I could have made it a different material, but I like the soft edge. I think it adds a nice look to the eye in this case. Okay, so now I've got this nice base, and I want to start creating some more color. I like to have kind of a dark edge around my iris, so that's why I'm starting so dark on this. And at any time, I can come down here and I can adjust the value. You know, if I want to go a little darker, I'll just click and drag. Let's do 0.02. It was 0.03. Now it's 0.02. It's a little darker. I could go brighter, but you get the idea. So let's go ahead and create another circular item. In this case, I'm going to duplicate, but I'm going to start changing some of the values. So I'm going to start by changing the color values. Let's just go a little brighter. I'm not going to go too much brighter. So I'm just going to go, yeah, that blue's looking nice. So I went 0.05 down here in the foreground color. I'm going to keep all the same values, except I'm going to just come down on the size just a little bit. So let's just try 300, and that's working for me. As you can see, I've just got a slightly larger circular shape behind it, which is going to be that dark shape. And I'm liking that. And one of the things that I'm going to do, we can go back and change it back. But remember how I added that reflection? Well, I'm getting the reflection of the environment on there, and it might be throwing off my color choices. So I have a couple options. I can go into the material and say, you know what, for right now, no reflection. Okay, and then I'm not seeing that reflection of the environment. The other thing that I like to do, even though I like this gradient, it's a really nice gradient background, I can go over to my environment, and go over to my environment material, and under environment type, for right now, I'm just going to say constant. And instead of white, I'm going to make it black. Okay. Maybe not as exciting. It looks a little nicer with that gradient, but I don't want to have any distractions. I just want to be able to work on this like this. Okay, so I'm going to head back over, and so now I've got two circular shade procedural textures that are texturing the iris, and I've got this this procedural texture here, the circular, set to displacement, which is sinking in the pupil. But now I need to start adding some really fun colors. Now, there's all different types of procedurals, and I'm going to just pop open the inline help here to take a look at some of the procedural textures that come with Modo. So there's all different types here, and we're using circular here. This is a great little cheat sheet, so if you're not sure what one of the procedural textures is, this will give you a pretty good idea. And I got really excited the first time I saw iris. I went, oh, I'm so going to use this for creating eyeball textures. And I did at first, but I found something that I actually like better. The problem that I have with the iris is that it's these perfect streaks, and you can adjust the values, but there's one that is pretty nice. If we come over here to other and scroll down, there's under the space subcategory, there's blast. And once I started working with blast, I went, that should be called iris. I actually like that much better. There's also flare, but let's take a look at using blast. I think it gives a more natural look. But again, there's so many different options that you can do for eyes, and depending on the style you're going for, so you'll definitely want to experiment. So I'm going to go back over to Modo, and let's take a look at adding a blast. So I'm right here. I'm going to come over to Add Layer and Space and Blast. I'm already excited. Look at the shapes that are going on. I think we can get some pretty nice iris patterns going on with this. Of course, the first thing that I'm seeing is that I've got my eye went black, and the reason why is that as I stack up here in my shader tree, whatever's on top is going to be on top of everything else and kind of take over. So what I'm going to do is for that black texture, I'm just going to come over here and say 0. I want it 0 alpha so that we're seeing right through it. And 100% means we're seeing the foreground color 100%. As you can tell, it's probably too small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and size it up. Let's take a look at what the size is, 100 millimeters. Let's try 300. Okay, I think I can go a little bigger than that and get a better look. So 0.35, 0.35, 0.35. Okay, I'm liking that. See how we're covering more to the edge. Now these little wisps run over. We're going to have to solve that problem. But first, let me not even think about it. I'm just going to look at the shapes that are going on here and see if that's working for me. I'll figure out how to block that out in a few. So let's go over to our options here. And for this, just to keep it simple, I'm going to keep most of the settings the same because, default, because it's kind of looking nice. But as you can tell, I'm getting these more organic shapes, which to me looks a little closer to what's going on in an actual iris. Okay, but I want to just I definitely want to change the color. Let's do that. We've changed the size. Let's change the color and see what we come up with. So I'm just going to click and start playing and see what looks nice. Maybe change this a little bit. And yep, let's go with this. We're gonna make it blue. I already started with blue colors here. I'm just gonna go with a lighter blue. Okay, so that's looking nice, but I've run into a problem, and my problem is that I have all that kicking outside of the iris, and depending on if your character calls for that, then maybe you want to keep that. I don't want it. I want to keep everything locked into that iris. So I need to mask it in some way. So I'm going to create a layer mask, but instead of creating it from scratch, I've already kind of done the legwork. So I'm going to go to this circular texture. That's the smaller dark blue, and I'm just going to right click, create instance. Okay, so it duplicates it. It's already sitting underneath blast, which is where I would need it. So I just really need to come over here and say layer mask. And there we go. So this procedural texture is masking out the procedural texture that's above it, the blast. And so I'll want to have a layer mask for anything that spills outside of here that I don't want spilling out. Now, why didn't I just duplicate it? Why did I do an instance? Well, I did an instance because now if I go back and I needed to change the values of that size, say I decided the size was too small or too big, well, instead of having to change it for each one, I know that I want the iris to fit inside of this darker edge. So I'll just use the same values by using an instance. And I'm just changing the effect that copy, that instance has. And that's a really, really useful way. It makes me a lot more efficient whenever I'm doing my texturing to use instances. You don't have to. Again, you can just duplicate whatever works best for you. So I'm going to kind of do the same thing that I did with the circular shape. I'm going to add another blast, but I kind of already have it in the place that I want and kind of the size that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and shift click these two and duplicate. And then I'm just going to move my circular underneath there so that it goes mask, procedural, mask, procedural. Okay, so let's not worry about changing the size just yet because I want to see if we can get away with it. But one of my favorite options for blast is that you can change the blast raise. And by default it's 16. I'm going to try 24. Oh, yeah, I'm liking that. I'm getting some pretty interesting shapes there with the more rays that are going on. And if I change the color of this one, let's just change the values here a little bit. Just going to tweak the values, and I'm watching what's going on to see what works for me. Maybe something like that. So now I've got the two different values, but they're also two different shapes. Same size, but because the rays are smaller, they're much thinner. And now I'm already starting to like what I'm seeing, and I'm starting to see an iris. with those nice organic wavy lines in there that are coming from the center, similar to what the iris texture would do, but with the with all this distortion going on. Okay, so I'm liking that, but I know that I want to just add a little bit more detail, and I'm going to just keep doing it with Blast for now because I think it's working. Now you can experiment with different procedural textures and start layering them up and getting an idea and see what works best for you. But for me, I'm going to duplicate again. Okay, when you duplicate, it's not putting them in the right order, so I just need to drag that mask right up to here. I'm going to come over to this one. At this time, instead of going with a brighter blue, what I'd like to do is go with something a little darker. Let's try just adjusting these. And to adjust, I'm just left click and dragging. Let's maybe not so dark. And then I'm just going to change the blue value here. Okay, and to get an idea, I'm just going to turn that off, and you can see now it's right on top of it. It's a duplicate, so I don't want as many rays. I'm covering that up, and maybe I don't want to do that. So I'm going to change this from 24 to 12, and it makes it much smaller. So and by doing that, it takes it off of, it takes it from being right on top of that. But you can see the dark little rays there. They're going to come right from behind the pupil when we get the pupil there. Okay, so I'm liking what's going on with this, and again, I could keep layering and layering and layering those blasts, and you can get some pretty nice results. But let's go ahead and say that we've got enough of those going on for now, and I want to start introducing some new shapes into here. So I'm going to work with another procedural, and so let's take a look. I'm going to come over to my list, and let's try crumpled. Okay, I'm a big fan of this. I use it for water. I invert it for leather. It's a really fun procedural to work with, but I think it ends up working out pretty nice for the eye. So I'm going to start by taking a look at the scale of these shapes, and I think I should go a little larger. So I'm going to try 200. Yeah, and I'm liking that. So let's go over here and take a look at getting rid of some of the surface here so we can see the work that we did. We just covered it up again because it's sitting on top. So I'm going to come over here and change my background to 0 alpha so that I can start seeing through. Okay, and I'm also going to kind of tighten that up a little bit. So for the lower clip, I'm going to increase that. Try 8. No, that's too much. I'm going to go back to 50. Okay, again, how did I know to type in 50? Well, I just said 0 wasn't working, and I know I don't want to go to 100, so I tried the halfway point, 50. Kind of liked it, but I wanted to, test and see what else is there that I can use. Okay, so I'm liking the patterns there. Now, if I'm seeing a shape somewhere else that I like, I can always go over to my locator and say, let's move it. And so I'm just kind of moving that pattern and maybe right there, get some of those shapes in there. Okay, you can rotate it, you can do all kind of stuff, but let's just go ahead and use that. I'll come back over here, and I definitely think I should change the color. That color is not working for me, so I'm gonna just play with the values here. I want to go back into the blue range that this seems to be working for us, and just scrubbing this until I like the fact that I don't have to know what I want until I see it. I can just keep scrubbing the numbers, and let's just say that works. It's kind of a nice bright blue. But again, we've got the problem that it's all over the surface, and I actually kind of like some of the shapes that are going on there. I'll have to remember that for future use. And I'm going to go ahead and mask that as well. So our handy little mask, I'm going to duplicate that. Now remember, because it's an instance, when I duplicate it, I don't need to do duplicate instance. And I'll just put it right underneath there. And there we go. So that's nice. I'm actually liking what's going on there. I'm gonna create another one and put it right on top of that. So let's grab both of these. I'm gonna select that, hold down Shift, and duplicate. Grab that mask and raise it up. And right now they're sitting on top of each other. I'm going to start by going back to my texture locator, and maybe I'll set this back to 0. That at least moves it. But you know what? I'm going to size it down. Let's cut that size in half. Oh, look at that. Those are some nice, I think those are some pretty nice shapes that are going on there. And really though, to kind of mix it up, I think we should change the color a little bit. So I'm going to come over here and maybe just increase this a little bit. And maybe I'm just going to increase some of these. And again, just kind of scrubbing and watching and seeing what I like. And I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so let's rotate this as well. We were talking about changing the position. I'm just going to rotate it. Just kind of mix it up so that there's some differences in the values. Okay. Okay, so I like what I've added here, and I like that I can still see the blast procedurals through this shape, but I'm kind of bummed that I lost some of that blast information. So because this is covering it up. So I could kind of change the order of these things, like drop some here and there, or just to have a little bit of fun, I'm going to make another blast. So I'm going to grab these two right here, and let's just duplicate, and I'm going to raise them above everything else. Okay, so it's sitting right on top. Okay, and I'm going to start changing some of the values. So I'm going to start not on my layer mask. Of course, that's an instance. I'm just going to change the blast. So I'm going to start with the size. I think the size is good at 350. Let's take a look at maybe changing. Let's change, before I change the color, I'm going to change the amount of rays. Okay, you can see that there. I'm just going to start playing with some of the values again, just to see what's going on here. Okay, and what happens if we do size this up? I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about it going outside of here because of the mask, so I can go as large as I want. Okay, kind of like that, but I do want to adjust the values a bit. So just tweaking. Get a lot more blue going on in there. Get some nice bright blue eyes going. Something like that. And I could tweak that all day, so I'm going to kind of let that roll. Okay, so let's call the iris color work done. Again, we could keep going, adding all kind of procedures, but I think there's some nice shapes going on in there, and we'll call this finished. But I have, and I can't tell right now, but what you'll find is that you'll discover that there's actually a problem. It's textured on the back as well. Okay, that's a slight problem. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to come up with a solution that allows us to have, and I could just give it a different material back there, but I don't see the point in doing that whenever I can do some kind of mask just like we did for this. So let's take a look at creating a mask to take care of that. So instead of using a layer mask, I'm going to use a group mask. So I need to make a group to kind of separate this stuff out. Okay, so I'm just going to slide that down, and I'm going to grab everything and hit Control G and put it in a group, and I'm going to call this iris, just to kind of stay organized. Okay, and see, I can collapse that. It's nice and neat. It sits underneath my within the hierarchy of my eyeball. Okay, so I want to create a mask. I'm going to use a gradient. So I'm going to go over to Processing, Gradient, and it's set to diffuse color, so it's going to make it all white. I'm going to go ahead and set this to group mask, okay? And it's going to mask everything within this group. And it looks like it's working because it's showing me this, but let's take a look back there. Nope, it's still showing me the back. So I need to mask this, and I want to go from the front to the back. Now I could try for the input parameter, I could try all sorts of things. I could say, well, maybe I could come over here and say Z distance to locator, put a locator in there, and it's moving away from or getting closer to, and base it off of that. But I'm going to take advantage of a different option for my input parameter. I'm going to go back and take a look at my mesh just to see what we have. For our UV map, a UV map was generated when I created the default sphere. And what we're looking at is we're looking at the unwrapped mesh on the UV space. And let's take a look at what's what. If I go to polygons and just select these, I can see that it sits down here on the lower portion of the UV space. And our UV space is, okay, this is U for horizontal and V for vertical, and we're going from 0 to 1, 0 to 1. So the value of my say my vertical of my V, my textured V, is 0, and then as it goes towards the back, watch the highlight over here. So I start here, and as it goes back, it's increasing the value to 1. So I'm going to take advantage of that. It's already set up. Why not? And see if that'll work for us. So I'm going to come back over to render. Okay, and for my texture locator, instead of projection type solid, I'm going to change it to UV map. For UV map, I'm going to choose the only one that we have, which is texture. But you might think about as early as now going back and changing the name so that it's not texture. That's a very generic name, and if you end up with more UV maps, that could throw you off. Okay, so I'm going to come over to texture layers, and for input parameter, let's go find that textured V. Okay, so texture V value of that UV map, and let's edit the gradient. So this is something that you'll want to pay close attention to. It threw me off. Maybe it didn't throw you guys off, but my first setup for doing masks was I was using RGB values. I was just going, oh well, I'll go, white is 100% or 1, and black is 0. So I'm going to, a low value. So I'm just going to make a black and white gradient and use it as a mask. Wouldn't work. I tried alpha, wouldn't work. It's actually just looking for value. So you want to make sure that when you're setting up your gradients, if you're going to be doing something with diffuse color, then of course you're going to want that RGB value. We'll take a look at adjusting some of these later. But for right now, we just need value. And also you need to know, you need to look at the numbers down here and the numbers here and see that right now at 0, it's 100%. Okay. So it's white. I could come over here and drop a key, but over here doesn't really matter. That's 5. And on my UV map, the UV space goes from 0 to 1. So I'm just going to come over here to 1, middle mouse click to drop a key. I'm going to select the key, and I'm going to set that to 0. Okay. Now, I'm not very happy with the results because this started getting ghosted out, and I see a faint look of where the iris was, even though I set it from 0 to 1. Well, because we've got this nice curve that's kind of fading it. Now I could start adjusting handles, but I'm actually going to do the sloppy way of doing it, which I think is faster. And I'm just going to start moving these closer together. Okay, I can see that's gone away. I just want to make sure that I'm getting full color up here. So if I put it back, starts getting milky. I'm just going to crunch it in. Because I'm not trying to hit a special spot right in the center or something like that, I've got all this range here that as long as it's not showing back here, I'm happy. Now, that said, would I ever see back here? I can't think of a case where I would need to see that part of the mesh, but I'd like to just tidy things up and go ahead and do it anyway. Okay, so this is using this gradient based off of the UV space to mask out everything so that we're not seeing it on the back. Okay, again, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, because it's not gonna really show up when you have this thing sitting inside of a head. But you might have the ball, you might have the eyeball rolling down the street or something out of the character's head, and then of course you would see it. I don't know why I just came up with that, but I did. So we've got our iris. Now I think we're pretty much ready to go for the pupil. So let's take a look at creating the pupil. I think you're going to read my mind on this one. This one could be an easy one. I'm going to start by taking the displacement and duplicating it. Okay, and I'm just going to raise this up to above the iris. Okay, and instead of displacement, I'm going to change it to diffuse color, which is this white dot. So I'm going to need to, of course, change the color. So let's raise this up, and we're going to raise it up just a little bit more, and I'm going to change this to black. There we go. It's a little small, so I'm going to go over to the size, and let's increase the size. Let's just start with 100 millimeters and see if that works. It's also soft, so I'm going to see if I can fix that. Remember when we created that, we wanted to kind of smooth out the indentation, so we changed smooth to 100. I'm going to change it to 50. All right, that's looking more like what I wanted. Okay, so that's looking pretty nice. All the other values I'm pretty happy with. We've got our pupil. We do have a problem, or at least I think it's a problem. And right now, as I move this thing around, I like that I'm getting a speck hit on here. I think it's kind of strong. If I go to my material, I think the roughness needs to come down. It's an opinion. I'm going to just lower it, and I like that much better. I could lower it, the roughness, so that it doesn't spread that specularity value all over the place. I'm just tightening it up there. I could increase or decrease my spec value, say like 60. I think that's a little too high, so I'm just going to go 30. But you can play with those values. Okay, and I like that I'm getting that. I think it's a nice touch, but I don't like that it's happening on the pupil, because the pupil is supposed to be a hole. You shouldn't get a speck hit on that. So I got to figure out how I'm going to change that. I could change the material, give it a different shader and or a different material and go in there. But I'm actually going to try something different here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this texture and I'm going to make an instance of it, so it has the same values, but for diffuse color, or for the effect, instead of diffuse color, I'm going to go and say specular amount. The speck goes away. Let's see if we still have it in other areas. No, so we got to figure out what's going on with our values here. So the foreground is set to -100. Okay, and I set it to 100, and that gives me the exact opposite that I want. Okay, so I'm going to set this to 100 and this to 0. But that's 100% specularity. Remember when we were looking at the material, I was saying, no, I want to lower it. I thought it was too high, and I think we settled on something like 30. So let's try 30, and there we go. So what I'm saying with the specular amount effect on the circular is, I'm saying I'm using this at the lower value. That's the foreground value right there. It's 0. So I want 0% specularity, and I want 30% everywhere else. Okay, so I get a nice speck hit on there, but not, there we go, not within the area of the pupil. Now, something you can think about doing, we don't need to do it because I don't have, to my knowledge, let's go back to that material, reflection amount 0. So I don't have any reflection, but if I did have reflection, well, I need to think about creating a reflection amount procedural layer to do the same thing. I can also set up a diffuse. I can do whatever instances I want. And what I like is that because it's an instance, if I change the value of my diffuse here, my diffuse color, it'll affect all of them. Okay, so now I've got my pupil, and I think that's working for me. So I'm going to go ahead and make a group for these. Okay, so I'm going to select both of them, Control G, and let's call this pupil, just to try and stay a little organized. Again, I could rename these as well to be even more organized, but I'm going to be lazy right now and just set it up this way. So I've got pupil, iris. If I want, I could drag the displacement right here. That's actually the pupil displacement, but I'll just leave it there. It'll be fine right there. Okay, so if I wanted to, I could call this done. I still need to make something to make this glossy and to make it round, which we'll get into. But I do want to add a little bit more. Depending on the style of eye that you're going for, this could work. But I want to add just a little more detail to my setup here, and I want to add some veins. I want to add some like bloody veins, and you can decide whether you need those on your eye or not. I think it would be kind of neat. Again, this eye is already working for me. Depending, for a certain style, I might want it, pure white. But just to play a little bit more and to show some more options in the shader tree, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new procedural, and let's see if there's something that will give us something like veins. So organic, we've got veins right here. Okay, wow, kind of cool. So I'm seeing all kind of like little wormy vein things. I think this will be perfect for what we're going for. The first thing that I see is that it's covering everything, which I definitely don't want that. So I'm going to change the background to 0 in the background alpha, so that we can see through. We can see, unless this character has the T virus or something like that, we're going to want to get that off the the iris. But first, let's get a better color going here, and I'm just going to go red and maybe just darken that up some. Okay, and I actually want to. Let's do this. I'm going to change the scale of this at some point, but I want to do it later because I want to actually show you the instance working, and so I think this would be a good place to show that. But I do want to change some of my values. I'm going to look the veininess, instead of 1, let's go 2. And as you can see, there's more veins. The veininess has been increased. I do want to take a look and see. You know what? From a scale standpoint, I know I said I'm gonna change it. 0.5, no, 0.05, 0.05, 0.05, nice and small. Okay, but we're gonna change it later. But just I kind of like the idea of these being small for now. Okay, so I've got that, and I'm thinking I probably don't want the T virus going on all this madness. So I'm going to, well, one thing I could do is I could just take this and drop it below that stuff, okay? Because whatever's sitting on top of it will override it. Again, I don't like, I like what's going on here in the middle part, but I don't like that it goes all the way to the iris. Not really digging that. So I need to come up with a way to change that, and I think we already know the answer. The quick way would just be to do a gradient. So I'm going to add a gradient, and I'm going to drop that below veins, and I'm going to set that as a layer mask. And of course, by default, it's not going to do anything because it's white and it's on everything. Okay, so I'm going to use the UV map just like we used before, because I think that's just a quick way of doing it. So UV map, texture. Right about now, I'm very thankful that the UV map is automatically generated because I didn't have to do any work for that one. For input parameter, I'm going to go over and do sample parameters and texture V. Okay, I need to edit my gradient. And again, we're working in the 0 to 1 range, and we're working with value, not RGB or alpha. We're working with value. So I'm just going to drop a key here, and I'm going to do the exact opposite that that I did before. I'm going to make this 0. But I don't like that it's fading so much like that, so I'm going to tighten this up. Okay, so we get some white, and the veins kind of come on. But I think I need to just adjust this. I'm just looking, I'm eyeballing it. No pun intended. Sorry about that. That was pretty bad. Okay, so let's just say I'm happy with that. Okay, get a nice fade into the veins. Okay, so that's working for me. I actually want to add, want to make it really red back here, kind of out of control red back there. So I'm going to add, you know what? I'm going to add a new gradient. So let's go to processing gradient, and on this one, let's use the same setup. I'm going to go to UV map, and I'm going to go to texture. Go back over here, and for input parameter, let's check texture V, go to my gradient, and this time I'm going to, well, I'll start by giving this that red color. Okay, get some red on there. I'm going to drop that below the iris. It's kind of a neat look, not really what we're going for. And I'm going to change the values of the alpha, so that I'm just going to use solid red, and I could have it go, you know, to different colors. But for alpha, I'm going to stay within the 0 to 1 because I'm using that UV map. But for this, I'm going to drop it to 0. Okay, and that's actually the exact opposite of what I want. So I'm just going to swap these. Okay, and I can just adjust these until I like what I'm seeing. Okay, so I go really red, and then veins, and then to white. Okay, so this is an example of using alpha to control my gradient. We've already seen value, and then RGB would just be setting keys and changing the RGB values. Okay, so, and actually let's do it just so that we can say we've done it. Okay, so I'm just going to drop another key, and then I'm going to come back to here and make it darker. Okay, so that we got the pupil. We're gonna have to deal with that. I'm glad we spotted that, because I wouldn't want that to pop up during an animation. Okay, so let's deal with that. But let's say we go dark to a lighter color, and that's using RGB keys in the gradient. So we've done all three. I feel like we've accomplished something there. Okay, so we go red, veins, white, but we got to fix that pupil showing through. And again, it's showing through because it's sitting outside of the iris group. So if I go to iris, and remember we got this group mask, well, I'm going to create an instance, drop it up here, and problem solved. Okay, and again, it's an instance, so if I change one, it'll change the other. Okay, so now we have this. We're almost there. I want to add just a little more detail to this, and I want to make those veins kind of bumpy. So I'm going to take the veins, create an instance, so that if I change the value of, you know, the size or anything on veins, it's gonna show up. But as you can see, we've got the same problem of it going everywhere. So I'm going to take this layer mask and create an instance, and I'm going to drag that there. Okay, and it's set to diffuse color. I'm actually going to change it to displacement because I want to make it nice and bumpy, but probably not that bumpy. I'm going to bring that value down because I think it's a bit high. That to me is working much better. It'll look less blocky when we do the render, but I like what's happening there. Okay, so now we have all the elements, except it's not. I'm not really feeling the glossy eye look, and it's flat here, which probably isn't going to work for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the cornea. Now I can go into much more detail about building a cornea. I'm going to do a much simpler version for this because this is more about texturing, and a lot of times I actually set it up the way I'm going to show you, where it's not physically accurate, but it looks good. So let's come back over to our model quad view, and I'm going to come over to the mesh here, and I'm going to give it a new name, eyeball, because I'm going to create another one. I want to stay organized. And this time I'm going to make a mesh that is for the cornea. So I'm going to come over to basic, and this time instead of holding down control, I'm going to hold down shift, click, and it adds a new container with a default sphere. Okay, and for this one I'm just going to size it up a little bit. Let's go full screen. Let's hit R, and I'm just going to size it up just a little bit larger than the eye. We can be a little more accurate later, but this works for me. Okay, and let's hit M for material and call this cornea. And I'm going to make it 0% diffuse. We could change that later, but okay, there's a lot of things I could do. I could rotate this so that the poles are facing down the Z. I really don't care, because in this case I just want it to be smooth there. If I wanted to make it a little more accurate, I'd actually make a little bulge for the cornea, kind of, you know, right over the iris, and make a little bulge. But for this, I actually want this to just be a perfect sphere for the cartoon character I'll drop it into. Okay, so the only other thing that I'm going to do, a couple things. I'm going to take this sphere and call it cornea, just to be organized, and then I'm going to parent it by left click, dragging and dropping it here, so that when I move the eye, the cornea goes with it. It's just a quick setup that works better for me. So I'm going to hop over to my render tab and see this. this is not really all that exciting for me. Okay, so I'm going to take my cornea. I'm going to look at the group, and we can see that it's only going to affect the material named cornea, which is nice. So I'm going to come to this material, and I'm going to start just so I can see what's going on. And under transparency, I'm going to set that to 100%. Okay, so now I can see my item, and I'm going to change the refractive index. I'm going to actually use the presets here, and let's just do quartz. Okay, and you can already see it kind of warps the eye because of the refraction, the light's refracting in there. And if I turn it, we can see that we get the bulge. Okay, if we change this to 0, or actually to 1, sorry, which is air, we're going to see no bulge, which doesn't really give the effect that we want. So I'm going to go to quartz. Okay, so now I have that. I can change a lot of different values on my cornea, and what we'll see is that the spec hit is on top of the iris and the rest of it, which is what I want. So I get a nice glossy eye, and I can change the values again. If I think that's too soft, I'll come back over here. Maybe the roughness needs to be something like 5, so I get a nice little dot right there. Maybe I want some reflection, maybe 5%, 10%, and really start getting this looking nice. Okay, so there we go. We've got our base eye here with a cornea, and we've got all the nice textures, all procedural, somewhat organized. I could name this stuff and kind of organize this a little better. I'm actually going to drop this down. And the only last thing that I think I want to do, because we haven't done it the whole time, is get a render of this guy so we can take a look at what this looks like. So let's take a look. Hit F9, and there we go. We've got our render with all our bump and nice speck. I'd probably adjust the light and get the speck on a better spot, but it gives us an idea. I like seeing the speck hit, something like that. It's kind of nice. But it gives us everything that we need to drop this into a character, and we've got our procedural textured eye. Again, you can go in here and start changing values. And actually, I want to do one last thing, and I promise I'll wrap this up. But we talked about the changing the values, and I'm looking at the veins here, and I do want to change that. So I'm going to come down here to veins, and I'm going to change the scale. And because we have an instance, we should be set here. So let's just change this. Let's try 1. Okay. So I'm liking that better than the smaller. So as you can see, the bump is matching because it's an instance, so it's going to use the same values. Okay, and with that, I will conclude this this little tutorial about creating a procedural textured eye in Modo.
Yum, yum!